On November 22, 1963, the plane of U.S. President John F. Kennedy landed in Dallas, Texas. At the airport, the president was greeted almost with open arms. He, as always, is in a formal business tuxedo, while his wife Jacqueline wears a smile on her face and a brand new pink suit. This outfit will remain in the memory of Americans for a long time. But not because of beauty, but because in a few hours the blood of the 35th president will remain on it. Dallas was the final point for the 46-year-old Kennedy, who was the first president of the United States born in the 20th century and the fourth to be assassinated.
News from Dallas. President John F. Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Time, about 38 minutes ago.
I did not kill the president. At least, I have not yet been tried for this and no charges have been brought.
John F. Kennedy was not just a politician, but a star who gave Americans hope for a new life. His first presidential term began in 1960. He had to take over the management of the country in rather difficult times. Falling economies, unemployment and racial injustice only flourished. His domestic politics seemed like something new to Americans. After all, Kennedy's liberal views after two conservative presidents looked encouraging. For example, he advocated equal rights for all citizens. He tried to reduce taxes. But most importantly, he set himself the goal of bypassing the USSR in everything. And space was Kennedy's #1 priority. He announced the landing of a man on the moon.
I believe that this nation has one great goal that must be accomplished by the end of this decade. Send a person to the moon and bring him back to Earth safely. No space project will be as exciting or more important than this one. And none of them will be so expensive and difficult to finish it.
With other foreign policy tasks, it was much more difficult. The wars in the world prompted him to create the Peace Corps in 1961. On paper, this agency is designed to maintain peace between world powers. In fact, it is a way to prevent the spread of communism to countries weakened by the war. At the same time, the Vietnam War, which was ineffective for the United States, and the unsuccessful attempt to overthrow the communist regime of Fidel Castro in Cuba in 1961. The plan to use Cubans dissatisfied with the regime failed. A few days later, the rebels were killed, and Cuba only got closer to the Soviet Union, which provoked new challenges not only for the United States, but for the whole world. The Cuban Missile Crisis began.
The Cuban Missile Crisis was a political confrontation between the USSR and the United States in 1962. American intelligence found Soviet nuclear missiles in Cuba that could easily reach Washington or erase the East Coast from the map. Kennedy decided to begin a military naval blockade of the island.
The American fleet has already moved to Cuba, ready to deliver a crushing blow. The risks were quite high. In the event of an attack, a nuclear war could begin. Therefore, Kennedy and Khrushchev agreed that Moscow would take missiles from Cuba, and the United States from Turkey. On the one hand, this would have saved almost the whole world. On the other hand, it crippled the ratings of the 35th president. The year is 1963. A new election was on the horizon, a new struggle for the main chair in the White House. It was decided to visit Dallas, Texas. During the previous race, the residents of this city did not really want to vote for Kennedy and gave their votes to Nixon. Therefore, coming and talking to voters is not a bad idea. The route of movement of the presidential column was approved on November 18, a few days before arrival. 2 days before his arrival, he was announced to the residents. And then day X came. Kennedy arrived in Dallas. Without wasting time, the presidential column moved to the central part of the city. There were 3 other people in the open limousine with Kennedy. Jacqueline's wife and Texas Governor John Connally with his wife Nellie. Just after meeting with voters, Kennedy was supposed to resolve the dispute between the governor and local politicians. But, as it turns out, the 35th head of the United States will not get out of the car. While the column was reaching the center, the weapon was prepared by Lee Harvey Oswald, a man who would shoot Kennedy in the head. It was climbing to the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository, a building that at first glance did not differ much from the surrounding ones.
Everyone saw the video of that day. The building of the book depository, like all other buildings, had open windows. If the special agents were there and did the job normally, not a single window would be open. And if someone dared to do this, they would already cooperate, and one of their people would instantly stand in that room, monitoring the situation. This is how the defense works, and what happened that day indicates that there were no special forces around the Dealey Plaza area.
As soon as the presidential limousine drove up to the desired point, the first shot rang out. Not everyone understood what happened. Because of the loud applause, it seemed that it was fireworks. And most civilians have never heard a military rifle fire. The bullet entered Kennedy's neck, just at the moment when he was waving his hand to the Americans. Only the Texas governor, a war veteran like the 35th president, recognized the shot sound as a sign of trouble. When Connally returned from the front seat to Kennedy, the president had already bent his elbows, clenched his fists, and held onto his throat. The car was moving at a speed of 18 to 20 kilometers per hour. People did not understand what happened. Another shot rang out, just as John Connally was returning. This time, the bullet pierced the governor's back.
I saw how the president grabbed himself by the throat, numb, began to lean to his left side. I realized something was wrong, jumped out of the car behind the limousine, and ran after the presidential car. I wanted to climb on it and shield the passengers with my body.
He might have succeeded if not for Kennedy's own instruction to keep guards away from the car to be closer to people, given before leaving the airport. This contradicted the regulations of the special forces, but they could not fail to fulfill it either. Therefore, Clint Hill decided to stay behind the limousine, and as soon as the shots rang out, he began to run. He almost had time to climb onto the car when another one sounded. Fatal. Straight to Kennedy's head. His blood and brains splattered the entire car. And Jacqueline's outfit. The video shows her trying to get out of the car. As Jacqueline herself later explained, she saw how her brains and skull shattered, and tried to put them together. The limousine slowed down for a moment, and at the command of Clint Hill, the car abruptly moved from the scene to the hospital.
I felt I had to reach the car on time. I was supposed to make it onto it in time, and it was I who had to catch that shot. It was my job, and I feel guilty for it. That's a failure, because I didn't make it in time.
Security guard Clint Hill was one of the most trusted people of the Kennedy family and Mrs. Jacqueline personally. Wherever the president's family was, he was always with them. This applied not only to work moments, but also to personal life. He was with them during religious holidays, entertained the children, and actually lived their lives. After John F. Kennedy's inauguration, Hill guarded several more presidents, but then became depressed and began to drink a lot because he believed that the bullet that hit John's head should have been for him. Finally, in 1970, he resigned from the Secret Service and never returned.
We rode around Europe, spent Christmas, New Year, and Easter together. We were vacationing on the beach of Florida. I seemed to live a luxurious life, but with a salary of $12 a day.
Almost immediately after John F. Kennedy's assassination, controversy began over the number of shots. Some believe that there were 3 of them. Others talk about 2. The theory of one magic ball appeared. We will talk about it later. Law enforcement officers began interviewing witnesses almost immediately after the murder. Who shot, when, from where? In total, the police considered at least 3 points of attack on the president. Most respondents, 50%, identified the 6th floor of the book depository. It turns out that Oswald fired 3 times in 5 seconds from a distance of 80 meters, hitting the neck and head of the president in a car moving almost 20 kilometers per hour.
Bam, bam, bam. We were unaware of what occurred. There were no telephones or fast communication. The limousine paused, then accelerated. We had no idea where they went or what happened.
John F. Kennedy was taken to the hospital and pronounced dead half an hour after the attack. At 1 p.m., Vice President Lyndon Johnson immediately became the new head of the White House. As soon as his powers came into force, he instructed the creation of the so-called Warren Commission, a special investigative unit that was supposed to investigate the Kennedy case, to answer 3 main questions: who killed, who ordered, how many people participated. All these questions will later give rise to so many conspiracy theories that it will be simply impossible to distinguish truth from reality. We will try to talk about some of them. The FBI got involved. Researchers believe that the director of the feds knew about the assassination attempt on the president even before his assassination.
This is simply absurd. Dallas police were alerted that they had a prime suspect in their hands. And they simply ignored the warnings and led the criminal to unprotected territory. The president had been dead for less than 48 hours, and J. Edgar Hoover had already drawn the conclusions of an official investigation, which, by the way, had not even begun yet. It will later come to the same conclusions. The bottom line is this. The final word of the investigation was dictated and planted even before the start of the investigation itself.
Kennedy's assassin Lee Harvey Oswald, at least that's what the investigation believes, is a former Marine with communist views. In the late 50s he lived in the USSR and later promoted communist views in the US. The FBI had been following him for a long time. There are versions that the CIA was also watching over him, which is strange, because the CIA officers do not officially have authority in the United States, but work only abroad. He was found 70 minutes after the murder. Eyewitnesses helped create a photo robot, and a police officer spotted Oswald kilometers from the crime scene. He invited him to get into the car, but Oswald shot him and fled to a theater nearby. There he was caught.
The only question is whether the special services are competent. No one in the CIA or FBI paid attention to this. They just turned a blind eye to it. This is one of the theories, the official one. And the other theory, to which I am more inclined, proves that Oswald was followed and knew about his intentions.
On the 6th floor of the book depository, the police found a rifle from which Kennedy was shot, the examination will later say. And Oswald's involvement was proved by a photo with this rifle. In the backyard of his house, he took pictures with it. It was an Italian Carcano M91, which he bought a year before the murder. For only $17. It was one of the cheapest weapons at the time. In addition, it was possible to establish that the fabrics and hair on the rifle coincided with those on Oswald's shirt at the time of his arrest. Interestingly, Oswald himself did not admit his guilt. He said Kennedy's assassination was blamed on him despite all accusations and evidence. Alternatively, due to the fact that he lived in the USSR for some time and was a supporter of communism.
It was I who found the rifle that Oswald used to assassinate Kennedy. The first thing I did was look at my watch. It was 13:22. At that time, no one guessed that it was Oswald's weapon, but there were no doubts in my head. Everything came together.
He was charged with the murder of the country's first person, mass shooting, and a number of other serious articles. On November 24, 2 days after Kennedy's death, the police were supposed to transfer him from Dallas prison to another. All this was filmed live. And at one point, a man named Jack Ruby jumped out and shot Oswald. The main suspect in the Kennedy assassination died on the spot. Jack Ruby in Dallas was known as the owner of the club. This is all. He later explained why he shot Oswald. According to him, this relieved Mrs. Kennedy of suffering. But investigators have their own version. They knew who they were leading and had to be careful. In their hands was the only man who could reveal the whole truth about Kennedy's death. His killer. And they lost him. The owner of the club simply came to an open area that was not even guarded. And he simply killed the witness, which only gave rise to new conspiracy theories.
The main proof that organized crime is behind all this is Jack Ruby. When he was still a child, he performed small tasks from Al Capone. Ruby worked for the Chicago Mafia. He is none other than a bandit.
Jack Ruby himself will later be sentenced to prison for murder. But in 1967, just before new hearings that could help solve the Kennedy case, Ruby was killed in prison. Who ordered him? And did anyone order at all? They never found out. But why? Little by little, they began to guess. Meanwhile, almost a year had passed since the beginning of the Warren Commission's investigation. On September 27, 1964, experts released nearly 900 pages of conclusions.
Who killed John F. Kennedy? The commission gave an indisputable answer. Lee Harvey Oswald. The second question. Did he act alone or was he a member of a conspiracy? The commission's answer. He acted on his own.
After that, it became clear. The American government hides the true results of research from citizens and may not investigate the case at all. Everyone was interested in one question. How powerful must you be to silence the entire American political elite? Who killed Kennedy really? Castro, Russians, Mafia, or their own CIA? Kennedy had a tooth for each of them. On Castro because of his regime in Cuba. On the CIA due to failed special operations, including failures in overthrowing the regime of the Cuban dictator. Against the Russians because of ideological differences, and against the Mafia because of economic ones. He wanted to cover up crime in the United States.
The official history just doesn't stick together. People are still hungry for information about this shocking event. They realized that the story they were being presented with was not true.
One theory suggests Kennedy's assassination was ordered by intelligence services, but it's uncertain if it was the FBI or CIA. But there are a few facts that make you think about it. The main argument is the wound on Kennedy's head. After the shot, it was clear the president faced an assassination attempt and was taken to the hospital. Death was ascertained there. Kennedy's body was placed in a coffin, covered with a white sheet, describing the size of the hole in his head. The coffin was to be flown to Maryland for detailed analysis. This was done by special agents. But when he was brought, it turned out that the body in the coffin was lying differently, and the head wound appeared to have been tampered with. It was cut to prevent a reliable examination. Someone possibly deliberately obstructed justice and investigation by covering their tracks.
At Parkland Hospital, all the doctors saw a hole in Kennedy's head. And then this story with the body in Maryland began. Doctors noticed that the wound was completely out of place. Half of Kennedy's head just disappeared. No one could believe it.
We took the coffin and moved it to the autopsy room. The coffin was grey, just like a box, metal. It would be recognized by anyone who has been to Vietnam. It was an ordinary coffin for air travel, and the problem is that it was put in a bronze box from the very beginning.
Another version of Kennedy's obsession is the theory of one ball, or magic ball. Its essence is that a bullet wounded two people with one shot. It was the first shot that wounded Kennedy and the governor. And the second shot was fatal. It originated because some people believe there were only two shots.
The theory of one bullet says that it entered the president's back, and exited through the neck, twisted and entered the governor's back and exited the right side of his chest, piercing his wrist further in its path, and then also entered the thigh, piercing him. And then a few hours later, it was accidentally found.
The president's wife, Jacqueline, says she doesn't remember that. Governor Connolly says that this did not happen at all, because they say that the first bullet hit Kennedy, and the second hit the governor. And Governor Connolly's wife says the same thing. And one of the special forces even says that one of the shots was in front of the car.
There is one but. This video shows Governor Connolly returning to Kennedy, and at that moment a bullet hits both of them. Is it a video crash? Is the one-ball theory really true? Recently, amateur researchers conducted their own study to see if it was possible to shoot from 80 meters and shoot two people. And this despite the fact that the bullet must pierce clothes, fabrics and bones. As it turned out, it can. Moreover, after passing the first target, it twisted and flew on. Everything is exactly the same as described by the supporters of this version.
This mock-up has the same density as the human body and the same resistance to puncture as muscles.
The story of the Kennedy assassination is still shrouded in mysteries. The lack of effective investigations and the suppression of facts lead to the fact that conspiracy theories appear to this day. People place the main blame on the American government, since they do not undertake to solve the case. People have a logical question: what is being hidden from them?
All this suggests that the government is keeping some documents regarding this case secret. Interestingly, what they hide may turn out to be just the most important or sensitive for the people themselves. They try to hide the whole story.
Another theory draws our attention to this man. On the day of November 22nd, when there was not the slightest hint of bad weather, he stood with an open umbrella. It was believed that this was a special design that made it possible to shoot small bullets, and the height and angle of flight were set in such a way as to hit Kennedy in the neck. That is, this man did not kill the president, but could well have been the one who fired from the front, as some intelligence agents claim. He might have participated in the assassination of the 35th president.
On that sunny day, a man stood near the crowd with an open black umbrella. The only one among all the people present at that time stood with an umbrella at the exact place where the president was shot. Does anyone have an explanation of what it is?
Such guesses couldn't escape special agents' attention. This man was summoned for questioning with the same umbrella. It turned out that it was not a weapon at all, but a protest. And perhaps it was conceived from the very beginning to confuse the investigation and people.
The open umbrella turned out to be a kind of protest, visual. The protest targeted Joseph Kennedy and Neville Chamberlain, not John F. Kennedy's policies, against their peace policy, which caused World War II.
More than half a century has passed since the assassination of Kennedy. And the commission never solved the main secret. Who ordered Kennedy? Castro, Mafia, the Soviet Union, or the CIA? Instead, only conspiracy theories and various speculations. What would have happened if Kennedy had survived and continued the presidential race? Would the Watergate scandal have happened then? Could Kennedy have established relations with China like Nixon? Would Martin Luther King be killed then? And Robert Kennedy? And how would the Vietnam War have ended? But John F. Kennedy's assassin Lee Harvey Oswald radically rewrote the history.